Let's talk today about the designated router and a backup designated router election process in OSPF on the Cisco routers. As you can see in my little lab here, I have 3 routers which are already configured with the OSPF. If I look at the router 9 and I do show IP OSPF neighbor, I should see two neighbors, router 10 and a router 11. Router 11 was elected as a DR or designated router, and router 10 was elected as a BDR, backup designated router. By default, OSPF will pick the DR, the router with the highest router ID. So in our case, it's here 11.11.11.11 is the highest router ID, and the router was elected as a DR. The router 9 is the router ID 9.9.9.9. Now, so how we can influence the election process of the DR and BDR? Sometimes in network design, you would prefer certain routers to be DR or BDR than others. So we can influence it. So the one way we can do it is by configuring the highest router ID in OSPF. So we can go back to the router, we are on the router 9, so we go to router 9. And on the router 9, I have already pre-configured loopback 1 with the IP address of 99.99.99.99, and I can try and force the router 9 to use it as a router ID, and then we should be able to force and recalculate the OSPF process. So router 9 will be picked up as a DR because it will have the highest router ID. So let's try it. So conf t do router OSPF 1, then I do router ID is 99.99.99. Now, it's not enough to do the clear IP OSPF process. I've tested it before. The best way to force all the routers to recalculate the OSPF and go through the whole DR BDR election process again is to just to reload the router. So I'll do a quick reload here. Reload. Now we just need to wait for the routers to come back and the OSPF to reestablish. Now we can see both of the routers are up. We can see there is a OSPF adjacency with the router number 10 and 11. So if I do now show IP OSPF neighbor, so we can see 10 is the other and 11 is a BDR. So if I look on the router, let's have a look at router 10. I do the same command, show IP OSPF neighbor. I should see that router 9 with the now new loopback IP address 99.99.99.99 is a DR router, and router 11 is a BDR. So this worked exactly as I was expecting. So by configuring the highest router ID, I forced the OSPF to take the router as its DR. Now the other option is to use the priority command, and you use that the priority command, it's an IP OSPF priority on the interface. So now let's go and configure the router 10 as a DR using the priority command. So if I go on the router 10, I need to configure the priority on an interface Ethernet 0/0. So if I go conf t int internet 0/0, and I can do IP OSPF priority. Now, and the priority is from 0 to 255, and highest priority wins. So if you configure 0, it will never become a DR router. If you configure the 255, it's the highest priority. So we can pick here something as a 250. By default, the OSPF priority on all routers, if you don't configure, is a priority 1. And if you're configuring the priority, it's a highly recommended not to configure 2 same value priority on 2 routers or 2 interfaces on the same network. So IP OSPF priority 250, I'll do VR to just to save the config. And again, the best way is just a quick reload here in the lab. to make sure the OSPF process starts again. Now, previously, before we done the restart, the designated router was the router number 9. Now we should see that the designated router will be router 10. So the routers are back and all up. It's quite quick. We just need to wait for OSPF to come up. Now we got the first router is up, number 10 and number 11. So we are on the router 9. So do show IP OSPF neighbor. And as I was expecting, so router number 10 with the router ID 10.10.10.10 has a priority 250 and it's become a DR. The next highest router ID is a router 11 and it become the other. So I was expecting the router 9 to become, so to show IP OSPF neighbor. Oh, it makes sense because we left the loopback 99.99.99.99 on the router 9. So we have a DR, BDR configured, and this is how you configure the priority command on the OSPF and influence the DR and a BDR election. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.